I'm really excited about this panel because I am a research nerd and love learning about all of these issues. So this has been very exciting for me to work with the folks on this panel. Our first witness is Rick Parrish, who is based in Washington, D.C., and he is the government customer experience. He serves government customer experience professionals. His research helps government overcome the unique challenges they face in developing successful and innovative customer experiences for the people they serve. And he works with Forrester Research. So we have cited his reports throughout my annual report. I've found them to be very, very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to his testimony. Then our next witness will be Tina Orem, and Tina is the tax writer at NerdWallet, which is a personal finance website that helps consumers make the best financial decisions. And prior to NerdWallet, she was a business writer and editor for more than 10 years. NerdWallet has been in the news. Some of their research studies have gotten some coverage during the filing season, and I'm looking forward to her testimony as well. And our last witness is John Sapp, and John Sapp has served in key positions at Drake Software since 1996. Drake Software is in Franklin, North Carolina, and it's one of the largest professional tax preparation and electronic filing companies in the country. And they have participated in the IRS e-filing program every year since it started up in 1986, since Drake started up. And today he is Vice President of Strategic Development, where his role is to help shape the future and growth of the company. He's also a CPA. He's here today because of his position on the CIRCA board, which is the Electronic Filing Alliance, basically. And he's completing his two-year term there as chairman. So again, the way we're going to do this is that each witness, each panelist will just make their opening statement, and I won't kick them off the podium if they go beyond 5 minutes, but I'll nudge them a little bit. Then I'll have some questions, we'll have some discussion back and forth, and then we'll open it up to the floor for anyone who wants to ask questions. Okay, so Rick, you want to go?
Sure, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be here with everybody. The big message that I have is that I have a lot of data that Forrester Research has collected. It's called our Consumer Technographics data set, and it really shows that the public is still skeptical of federal digital services. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about some of the results of that information, which I think really flies in the face of a lot of the conventional wisdom we often hear in DC about the public's attitude toward digital government. And I use it to kind of sound a cautionary note, and then offer a few pieces of advice on what I think that IRS should really do to move forward cautiously and do digital right instead of just more. So first of all, let me talk about the big overarching numbers here. When you look at customer satisfaction by channel, and this is for people who've actually interacted with federal agencies as their customers, right? Not just a sort of general public attitude, but really thinking about when you have interacted with a federal agency. How satisfied were you with that interaction? In person, customer satisfaction is 72%. Which is not great, but it's still better than either mobile apps or websites. Mobile apps and websites come in at about 69%, which is outside the margin of error for the study. So interestingly, people are still more satisfied with dealing with federal agencies in person than they are either with mobile apps or websites. And then we even ask more specific questions, such as, for instance, should the government offer more digital services? And this is one of those things where, if you sort of grab somebody off the street or around here and ask them, they're going to say, oh yeah, the public thinks the government should definitely offer more digital. People love digital. Not true. Our data set shows that when you ask people, should government offer more digital services, only 39% say yes. And that's actually down from 41% last year. Margin of error is 1.5%. So again, this is outside the margin of error. This is a real trend downward. Fewer people think government should offer more digital services this year than they thought it last year. And by the way, this isn't just people age 45 or age 60 and up. Millennials. You ask millennials, Should federal government offer more digital services? Only 39% say yes, down from 41. All right, so again, a downward trend there. Also, by the way, people over the age of 45 as well, downward trend there. If you think about income, people at the bottom third of the income ladder, who are in many ways the most vulnerable people, they say only 31% say government should offer more digital services. Then if you look at people at the very top third of the income ladder, these are the people with the latest technology. They have, multiple tablets in their houses. They have the best web connections, right? All the bells and whistles and gadgets. Still only 47%, less than half, say federal agencies should offer more digital services. Right? Totally against the inside the Beltway conventional wisdom. Then you ask people, okay, if you had the choice between trying to find the answer to a government question online yourself, or just picking up the phone and calling somebody, which would you prefer? 60% of people say they prefer to pick up the phone, including half of millennials. Not the story we usually hear about millennials, right? The story we usually hear is they don't want to talk to anybody, they don't want to do anything, they want to stare at their phones, that's the end of it. That's a story they tell about themselves. But time and again, we see that the data shows something very different, right? 60% of the total population, still about half of millennials, rather pick up the phone. Then you get even more specific. Sometimes people say, well, what we really have to do is we have to do really fancy things like a single sign-on ecosystem, right? Give people one sign-in, one login for all of their different, for IRS, for Social Security, for VA, for whatever. They're going to love that. Nope. Only 41% say they want single sign-on. And this isn't a question that actually explains it to them. We don't just say, hey, you want single sign-on? We explain to them what single sign-on is. Still only 41% want it. Then you might say, well, really the issue here is trust. After all, only 23% of the people trust the government to keep their information safe. What we really need here is better security. Biometric ID, right? That's the latest thing now, biometric ID. 42% of the people want biometric ID. Well over half say not interested in biometric ID. And again, this is after we explain to them what it means, right? So not a lot of excitement there either. And the biggie, single government portal. Right, it's the holy grail. We're going to put it all in one place. They sign in one place, omni-channel, it'll be wonderful. Nope, only 50% of the people want a single government portal, down from 53% last year. Opposite direction from where we often think it's going. Right. So, as you can see, the data really shows here that the inside the Beltway conventional wisdom does not reflect the country at large, right? And this is good hard data. This is something like 2,000 respondents across the country. This is a good data set. This isn't I called up 8 of my buddies on a Friday night and asked them. So what does this really mean? Right? What this really means is it doesn't mean don't do digital. Right? What it means is you actually have to do digital right. Like I said at the beginning, good digital, not more digital. Because after all, and it's a shame that I've been having to say this an awful lot lately, but I have. Customers don't want digital. What they want is the things that digital can provide if done right. Right? They want ease, they want convenience, they want effectiveness, they want to feel safe, they want to feel good, right? They want to feel confident. Right? They don't want digital. They want the things digital can provide if it's done right, and too often it's not done right. So let me offer a few pieces of advice here on how to do digital right and provide those things that people want. First of all, find the right channel for each service. As you well know, many times in DC, the answer to every question is build a mobile app. Unfortunately, I kind of wish that was the case, but it's not that simple, right? Sometimes mobile app is the right answer. More and more these days, it's actually not. Sometimes website is the right answer. Sometimes social media is the right answer. Sometimes it's phone. Sometimes it's in person. You've got to find the right channel for the right interaction. So that's the first thing. It's the little kids playing soccer thing, right? Everybody's crowded around the ball where it is, right? So that's one. Right channel. Second, design mobile services more strategically. And this is just another way of addressing the point I mentioned a minute ago, which is, right, the answer to every question isn't mobile app. So often, federal agencies measure their success in mobile by the number of apps they produce. And they pay no attention to how many people download the app, and then how many people actually use it once they've downloaded it, and then how many people continue to use it once they've downloaded it, right? There are over 300 mobile apps right now, federal mobile apps, and the vast majority of them have very few downloads. Now, IRS does have one successful one, right? The Where's My Refund app, right? That is a successful one, right? My point here, as I said, is not don't do digital, it's do digital right. Think strategically about building mobile. More isn't better. Third, you've got to market this stuff, right? Explain the benefits of digital channels. So often we just roll out a new digital channel. Hey, there's a new website. Hey, there's a new mobile app. Hey, there's a this, there's a that, there's a whatever. We have location-based services now. But then you never actually tell anybody about it, right? You never explain the benefits to them. This stuff is not self-evident. So not only do you have to tell people that it's out there, you have to tell people why it's a good idea. Using all the sort of classic, standard, good practices, speak in a language people can understand, tell them in places where they can find it easily, you know, the usual thing. That is to say, don't do the whole government speak thing. So you've got to explain why this is important to people, what the benefits are to them. And fourth, you've got to make sure that that group of people who is not going to engage with you digitally is still able to interact with you as easily and conveniently, as effectively as possible. Because there is some group of people, whether it's because of internet connectivity, or whether it's because of language skills, or reading issues, right, or whatever, any number of reasons why people might be unwilling to engage with you digitally. Don't forget about those people. The leader here is really the UK. The UK's government digital service has a group called the Assisted Digital User Group. They did a study. They figured that about 18% of the UK public is what they call assisted digital users. They can't engage with the government digitally on their own. They need help. And so they have a whole unit designed to figure out ways to help those people engage with government as effectively as possible, right? And that's something that is sorely lacking in DC. And it's a problem. It's a problem not just for issues of social justice, issues of democracy, et cetera. It's simply an issue for things like basic compliance. Time and time again, we find that that people don't provide government the information or the payments or whatever that they're supposed to, not because they want to defraud government, but because government makes it too difficult. And oftentimes it becomes more difficult rather than easier when you start rolling out digital services that are more but not better. That feels like maybe 5 minutes, which means it's probably about 10, so I'll stop there.
Okay. All right, Tina.
Excellent. Okay, I went the prepared speech route. Again, my name's Tina Orem. I'm a staff writer at NerdWallet. NerdWallet, which is headquartered in San Francisco, is a personal finance website dedicated to providing clarity for all of life's financial decisions. And part of that mission involves providing content on a variety of financial matters, including information and resources about taxes. So from time to time, NerdWallet commissions various surveys about how everyday Americans handle and think about money. I've been invited here today to discuss 2 of those surveys. You can follow along in the slides that are in the handouts if you like. The first is a recent survey NerdWallet did this past January in conjunction with Harris about millennials and taxes. I wrote about the findings of this survey for a story that appeared in USA Today. The survey asked more than 1,600 U.S. adults a variety of questions about how they file, who helped them, and what they did with their refunds last year, as well as what they plan to do with their refunds this year. We also asked the respondents how they felt about taxes, namely what they were afraid of and how confident they were that they would get the maximum refund if they were in fact entitled to a refund. The results were segmented by gender and region, income, education, employment status, and other factors, and that revealed a variety of interesting findings. And one of them is that millennials are afraid of taxes, like really afraid. A whopping 80% said they're fearful about some aspect of preparing their taxes. So granted, preparing a tax return induces at least some anxiety in most of us. And interestingly, some of that appears to be an age-related condition. Just 55% of people 65 and older said they're afraid of preparing their taxes compared to the 80% of millennials. 55% is still a majority, but our data seems to show that the anxiety worsens with youth. The average for all age groups was 69%. So we have a lot of nervous taxpayers out there. So what are the millennials afraid of? We found that about a quarter, so 22%, said they're afraid of making a mistake on their tax returns. About 1 in 6 said they're afraid they're leaving money on the table and that they won't get the biggest possible refund. And perhaps surprisingly, only 11% were worried about being audited. So who's quelling those fears? It may be mom or dad, because more than a third of millennials in our survey said they turn to family or friends with tax-related questions. That's the most of any age group in our survey, and it's a rate that's nearly twice as high as the national average of 19%. What's also interesting is that the survey found that when they have tax questions, more millennials turn to tax professionals than go online for answers. And so this suggests that when things get complex, millennials still prefer humans to screens. However, millennials are leaving one authoritative source out in the cold, and that is the IRS. Just 9% said they turn to it with questions, which incidentally is right in line with what other age groups reported in our survey. Perhaps most interesting, however, is our finding that millennials, who are digital natives, like filing paper returns more than most taxpayers do. An incredible 17% said they did a paper return last year and mailed it in, which is more than double the rate of those 35 and older. The second survey I'm here to highlight was published in February of 2015, so about 15 months ago. It was a 10-question quiz about tax basics related to retirement and college and saving and refunds. This was open to all age groups, and we had a pretty even weighting age-wise. First, we found the tax consequences of some of the most popular retirement vehicles are still a mystery to many people. So, for example, we asked the question, is the money you put in a Roth IRA pre-tax or post-tax? We got over 1,000 responses. 46% answered pre-tax. 12% answered none of the above. Here's another example. We asked the question, what is a flexible spending account? 11% said it was for home improvements. So some good news is that most respondents seem to understand that their exemptions and withholdings affect their refunds. So when we asked if your exemptions and withholdings are correct, your tax refund should be ... Some 56% answered that tax refunds should be as close to zero as possible. But of course the rest, almost half, said refunds should be $500 or more if their exemptions and withholdings are correct. So people generally seem to know that a $0 refund is ideal, but about 3/4 of us get them anyway, according to recent stats from the IRS. So it appears that tax refunds are sort of the whiskey of the personal finance world. We know it's not very good for us, but boy, do we enjoy it. So what does this all suggest? This all suggests there's definitely an opportunity to create a system that's less scary and more understandable for the largest generation in the history of the US, one that is still learning the ropes of adulthood. It also suggests that for many millennials, not everything revolves around a screen. Paper's still relevant, personal interaction is still valuable, and for some younger people, some things are best done the old-fashioned way. Last but not least, this does suggest that America's financial literacy problem most certainly extends to taxes. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Okay, John.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for inviting us today to talk about an extremely important issue, of course, the IRS future state. And I don't believe that anyone is going to say that the IRS should dump technology and go back to filing on paper. I don't believe that's practical in anyone's mind, although as we think about some of the security issues that we face, I think some of the suggestions that I've heard include turning off electronic filing that would do away with all the security issues, or going back to mailing out postcards with mailing labels on those postcards to process returns faster. We see a variety of things, and I think it's a little daunting to sit in between the two folks that show up in your Google search when you're trying to find stats for your presentation. And I find it very interesting that even anecdotally, the one thing that I believe, the message that we've heard at all of these forums that Nina's doing such a great job at doing, and that is you have to provide, as the IRS commissioner said, you have to provide taxpayers what they need, when they need it, and in the format that they can use it in, or in deliver it to them in the method in which they're the most comfortable. And I was shocked by your research on millennials, although I'm not shocked by the fact that millennials ask their parents for tax advice, because my millennials, I have 3 daughters, they ask for tax advice they don't like the tax advice they get a lot of times, but they do ask it. I was helping my daughter, who happens to be in her mid-20s, do her tax return, and one of the knocks on security is that it's too complicated, and we heard that in the earlier panel, that it was just too complicated for folks. And I watched her as she tried to explain to me her tax issue doing her own taxes. And every time she changed, because she realized she tried on her phone, well, I couldn't see her phone, then she tried on her laptop, and I couldn't really see her tablet that well, so she had to go to a laptop that had a big screen so her aging father, could see her tax problem. And each time she changed devices, she received a text on her phone and had to key that text in as a way to authenticate. And by the 3rd time, I was frustrated. I was thinking, this is overkill. Why are you having to do this? She's like, Dad, it's just the way it's done. Watch this. And so she was trying to explain her tax problem, but the technology itself gave her no problem whatsoever. Her taxes, on the other hand, scared her to death. So she wasn't scared of the technology, but she was scared of the tax process itself. And that is what I believe the partnership between the IRS and the tax industry has been able to accomplish more than anything, and that is to give taxpayers a place to go, their software company, their tax professional, to give them a wide variety of ways, even today, even without governmental portals, to interact with the tax system. And they can have more confidence in the fact that I'm going to talk to my accountant first, and that's my way to interact with the tax system. Or I'm going to go online and interact with my tax software, and I have 20 different tax softwares that I could choose from and pick the one that interacts with me the best. You wouldn't want a governmental entity trying to come up with a way to interact on that front end with the tax system to try to apply across all genres and all people in the United States, because our population is so diverse. So with that in mind, I also found it interesting that the IRS, obviously, if they can find a way just to open up the highway to allow people to deal with them effectively digitally, it will free up those resources to be able to deal with people that would rather talk to someone on the phone. 9%, I think, would actually, I think that was the number that would consider contacting the IRS. I would bet that they would consider going to the website, right, and dealing with them digitally, which would mean 9% of those folks are dealing digitally are no longer tying up the phone lines because it's their only option to talk to someone. So we're talking about presenting multiple options to taxpayers, which makes all taxpayers' experience more beneficial to them. Also, when we talk about promoting the different portals and those types of things, I found it interesting that back-to-back weeks on 60 Minutes, one week they talked about how the banking industry is going to cellular telephones. Everybody has one. Everybody can bank. You can send money phone to phone. The next week, they're talking about how every phone in the United States can be hacked just like that. So everyone that changed to digital currency and changed to digital banking, the next week was scared to death and had to turn it all off. We give mixed messages. We have to have a secure system that's in place and provide taxpayers with methods and partnerships with private industry where appropriate to help them comply with their tax obligation and do it in a way that they feel secure. I like the word safe, that they feel safe, and it allows them to comply. Because I do believe the vast majority of Americans want to comply with their tax obligations. But one of their biggest fears, I think, was that they were overpaying their taxes. And one of their second biggest fears, I did read your research, I'm stealing it now. Their second biggest fear is that they weren't getting as big a refund as they should. So I believe all of that, as we partner together, we can help impact that. So.
That's great. So maybe first thing I'll say is you all have heard one another talk. So is there anything that you all want to say about something that the other person has raised that might have been brought up, that you want to
Start. I don't know if I'm speaking perfectly here. The good digital versus not more digital, I think is spot on. So often we characterize millennials as addicted to the screen, and it is really about quality and not so much quantity, as we can see that sometimes they do opt for the paper returns. That may be because their tax returns are simpler. It's a 1040 Easy's got the easy on it for a reason in the name. Fees and the hassle of using the software could be another factor, but nonetheless, good digital is better than more digital.
I can just insert here a minute. I think it was back in 2002 in my annual report, I recommended to the IRS that it work out barcoding for those returns that were coming in on paper but were printed out. They were done on a software program. And I think you can go back to that report and find the IRS's response is this is an incredibly shrinking group and will continue to be a shrinking group. Well, it ain't shrinking that much. And for every paper return we get in this very resource-burdened environment where we don't have enough budget as it is, there is someone keystroking in those numbers with human error and everything like that, instead of, in 2003, putting in barcoding so we get these returns printed out from a software program and we can scan in that data. And it's that kind of thing when you're not thinking strategically and you're basing your assumptions on, behaviors that don't pan out, that we find ourselves in this environment today, I think. And your data makes me think we need to go back and recommend yet again that they do the 2D barcoding on those paper returns, since it looks like the millennials, at least for a few more years, are going to continue to do it.
On that sort of theme, I had two thoughts as well that I think link up really nicely with that. One is this idea of paper rather than digital. There's some really interesting academic research. It's maybe 2 or 3 years old now. That showed that people's reading comprehension was a lot higher if they read in hard copy rather than on a screen. And that also cognition is better when you're handwriting rather than typing. And so
I handwrite it.
Yes, indeed. And so I wonder if that might really have something to do with it. They're nervous about it. They don't want to mess it up. Let me print it out. They may not be thinking about it consciously, but maybe there's something they just sort of realize somehow innately or whatever that it's just easier to do it on paper if I'm nervous about it. I just sort of thinking out loud there. The other thing I was thinking of is this 9% figure. Which is just a wonderful number, and we have some really great data that shows this. Forrester has some really great data that shows that if you provide people with a good experience when they have to deal with you, they are far more likely to come back to deal with you even when they don't have to. Right? And that's one of those situations where, if IRS wants more people to come to them for authoritative tax advice rather than getting maybe the wrong advice from a family member who isn't a tax professional, or just Googling it or whatever, IRS, one of the best things IRS can do is provide a much better experience when people do have to deal with them. Then they'll be much more likely to come back when they don't have to.
And I think that sort of, if I can just weave in some of the future state stuff, just the other aspects of future state. We talk as if taxpayer service is bifurcated between taxpayer service and then enforcement, or taxpayer service and compliance. But let's say you go to a family member and they give you incorrect advice, and you do your return, and then suddenly you're getting a notice that's incomprehensible from the IRS, and you pick up the phone and you have to wait 45 minutes and you get a courtesy disconnect, and then you call back. This is your experience in a very scary environment. And then why, what does that teach you that you can actually turn to the IRS for help when you need it, when it's in this environment? At the same time, what we're doing, in these other channels like walk-in sites is that we're turning people away who have come in to these sites because they don't have an appointment. 3 weeks ago, right before the end of the filing season, so maybe it was a little longer, maybe a month ago, I got an email from a CPA who said, I just brought a check for $15,000 to the local fields, walk-in site because my client needed a levy released, and the IRS turned me away because I didn't have an appointment. And you're just thinking, how do you explain that to anybody? That's just irrational, and what's the message? And then how are you going to get them to come and trust you enough, whether it's to call you or to trust the website or anything like that?
And I would just point out, back to your point, your idea about the barcode, and I'm not pro or con against the barcode, but as we think of things in the government that have worked, in the Internal Revenue Service specifically, electronic filing of tax returns has worked. And it is something that has been widely adopted, well over 80% of all individual returns filed, which was the goal set by Congress. And basically the Internal Revenue Service was very creative in how they accomplished that. But they relied on the private sector to some degree to get their message out, to promote it. There were other products that developed around that. So electronic filing itself, I believe, could actually be the gateway to help build, I don't want to say a trusting relationship, I might be pushing it a little bit if I said that, but at least build some comfort level with the Internal Revenue Service. In other words, I have successfully electronically filed a tax return now, therefore when I do get a notice, they're at least a known element. I have, as long as it was successful, right? Dealing with rejects could be another issue, but.
Yeah. So if if the IRS future state is looking at creating this online account for taxpayers to get information from, and they could do a whole wide swath of things on it, theoretically, are there any particular things, based on what you're seeing and hearing in your studies, that taxpayer, that would lend itself better to the online account than other types of transactions? And that could be either capability or predilection. You could build it, but people won't come for that. But others, if you build it doing this thing, they will use it for that thing. Is there anything in particular?
One thing I think works very well and would build, dare we say, trust, and definitely work well in a digital format is wizards, that guide people through. And there's one federal agency called Business USA that I think is one of the most customer-centric federal agencies that does wizards quite well. So they're a place to look for wizards implemented in government. Of course, they serve people who are starting businesses and things like that. But a really great thing, that speaks to people in a language they can understand, which our data shows is a key driver of a good customer experience in any channel, right? It guides people through and helps them see that they can find things, that self-service is not scary. The IRS website is not a paragon of user-centric design at the moment, right? And so these sorts of wizards can be really valuable in helping people get comfortable with self-service and something that's scary. Make it not scary, and help them see you guys as a trusted advisor.
I could see wizards for someone who's renting out their home. What we heard this morning about the sharing economy, or you're, setting up a site on Etsy or wherever.
I would use the wizard every single quarter if it reminded me how to do my nanny taxes.
That's great. Yeah. A nanny tax wizard.
There's an important thing I agree with that. I think that it's important to acknowledge that there are sort of two levels of tax preparation. First, you've got the mechanical level, which is calculations and completing the form. But there's also a strategic level that is important to consider. And with something like a wizard, or this is why human interaction is so important. Is many people it's okay to file jointly or separately, but should I? I can physically do both, but which one should I choose? Should I itemize? Should I take the standard deduction? Those are things people are searching for information for all the time online, basic strategic decisions like that. So it's important for any kind of online assistance or wizard to kind of acknowledge, to go beyond just helping with the mechanics, but walking people through how to think about their tax situation in general.
It's really interesting that you raised that issue of married filing jointly, because this is one of my bugaboos, that the IRS has questions on their tax law line that they refuse to answer because they are out of scope, meaning they're too complex, according to the IRS, for its assisters to answer. And one of those questions is, should I file married filing jointly or married filing separately? And I've always said, you don't have to give a person the exact answer, but you can walk them through. You could create a little guide for your assisters to say, if you'd file married filing jointly, that's joint liability. You may not know what all the income is of your other spouse, et cetera. But if you file married filing separately, you give up certain things, and you can look for more information on this here. But that at least gives the person a starting point to weigh. And instead, we've just said we don't talk to you. If you call up today, we don't answer any tax law questions post April 15th. But if you called up during the filing season, that you wouldn't be given an answer. And that to me is just extraordinary, that your government won't at least do that.
That's interesting. I've had that experience a little bit when it came to dealing with some folks with ID theft. However, by and large, I think the IRS customer service folks, they want to help and they want to answer questions. Sometimes they don't have the database availability to give them the information that they need to solve the problem. And I think that's key as you think about what type of digital service or how you would present that digital service to a taxpayer or a tax professional. And I think your previous panel pointed this out very well. The needs of the tax professional are different from the digital standpoint than the needs of the taxpayer. So we couldn't have one size fits all. For example, in our development of software, we have learned that a taxpayer doing their own taxes, they have a lot of questions and they want a lot of wizards, they want a lot of pop-ups, they want a lot of suggestions, you're about to pick your filing status, here's some. Whereas the tax preparer, if we did that to them, they would be outside our doors with pitchforks, because all they want is efficiency. They know where they're going, they know what they want to do, they want to see how they got it done. So I think the approach digitally from the IRS side would need to be the same. Tax preparers, after all the hoops were jumped through, would want multiple access to multiple taxpayers, multiple clients dealing with multiple issues, whereas a taxpayer usually would have a single issue that they need to understand the issue and they need someone to walk them through that. I think the wizard is a tremendous idea for the individual taxpayer as a way to walk them through those issues and get them the information they need.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the different needs, of the different customers, and you pointed out one thing that is absolutely true, and so often people get wrong. You mentioned that the individual preparer is the one who wants very detailed information, and the professional preparer just wants move me through here, help me out. And this is a sort of, it's called progressive disclosure, right? You start with a little thing and then people can click to find out more rather than just overwhelming them with a huge block of data right away, which is so often what happens. And so often organizations get it wrong. There's a great case study from a few years back on a health insurance company that had just this issue. Okay, sometimes we have two sets here. One is the family members of people who are ill, and the other people are doctors. They thought, well, the family members are going to want just the sort of quick, like one-liner, and the doctors are going to want a lot of detailed information. Totally backward. It's the family members that wanted to obsess. The non-experts wanted to obsess for hours into the wee hours of the morning, right, reading everything. The doctors just wanted to be like, was I right about that? Yeah, good, let's go, right? And so often when we think about progressive disclosure, we get it backwards, right, over whose needs are what. And that's why these things, I see we've got two personas here on the table, are so vital to design to personas. Otherwise, you end up getting things backward like that all the time. Always designed to a persona. The other thing I wanted to mention is this idea about not even answering the question, not even helping people think through the question, just to sort of, no, we don't, we're the IRS, we don't answer tax questions here, kind of thing. One of the other key drivers, I already mentioned one of the key drivers of good customer experience for government, by the way, across any channel, is speaking to people in a language that they can understand. One of the other ones is taking the time to understand their particular issue, like, as a person, rather than quick pigeonholing it Okay, stop talking, that's this, boom, my grid, all right, here's the answer, done. You might actually get it right and get them the answer that they want. Chances are you won't, but even if you do, they're going to walk away quite unhappy with the encounter, right? And so this is one of the things, if you want, people have to walk away not only with ease, not only with effectiveness, but also with it has to hit the right emotional quotient, right? We call these the 3 E's of customer experience: ease, effectiveness, and emotion, right? And our data shows that emotion is, in government, the most important one. You can make the experience as easy and effective as you want, unless it hits the right emotional triggers with people. They aren't going to walk away saying that was a good experience. And that doesn't mean it has to be melodramatic.
Right.
It just means people have emotional needs, and those needs need to be met.
I think that's 100% true. I was just going to say, I looked at was pulling more numbers out of the research the other night. That emotional connection and that need for acknowledgement that your situation, it may be unique to you, is important to people. And I was looking through where we asked people, who did you turn to for tax advice or when you had a tax question? And I pulled out the percentages that said I turned to my tax professional, he was a human, or friends and family, also humans, and added them together. And there were just some interesting tidbits here. People in the Midwest and Northeast, well over 60% prefer to take their tax questions to a human. Gen Xers, 65%, millennials, 61% prefer to go to a human of some kind with tax questions. Women, millennials, 74%. Interestingly, education level, everybody was in the 55 to 59% range. There's not a real, it's not a real separator, nor is marital status. So this very strong preference for some kind of human interaction with tax concerns and questions suggests that you really can't automate this away. People don't want that.
Yeah, I think what has always astonished me is that we keep forgetting that we are dealing with people and their money, and we're dealing with it with the most powerful aid creditor in the United States, if not one of in the world. And so that goes to the fear, if I do something wrong, the second half of it is what might happen to me. And that's one of the reasons why in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, one of the rights that I personally wrote out and made sure it stayed intact through the entire process was the right to challenge the IRS and be heard. And so often, people forget about the second half of that sentence. That, if you raise a concern to the IRS has an obligation to listen to you, which means a dialogue so that you can learn from one another. I can learn how the IRS is looking at this situation. But the IRS also, has an obligation to listen to me because I may tell it something that it hadn't heard before. It didn't know about my situation. And I guess you could try to do that through emails, but so often, just in my own employees, I get copied on email chains, and I've seen these email chains go on and on and on, and I'm finally saying to them, just pick up the darn phone, would you? Have a conversation together. Because this is just like the Three Stooges on top of one another, And it's that I'm afraid that this future state is sort of built on that's going to be our mode of communication, and it's going to make it more efficient and easier. But I'm not sure it will, and it's certainly not addressing that emotional element, that I want to be heard. I want someone, I'm giving up my money to the United States, and I want someone to listen to me and talk to me.
And I think fundamentally, a lot of this is about complexity. Tax code is complex. Preparing your taxes is complex. I think for many people, especially if you go out and use your TurboTax or your H&R Block software or whatever, it's a magic formula, and you put your data in, and there's a magic formula, and just tells you what the number is, and you either pay it or you get some back, and isn't that amazing? And it's because it's so complex. And as everybody hopefully has taken Psych 101 at some point in your life, you know that people fear that which they don't understand. So introducing fear into this, the formula, there's a perceived lack of transparency that drives this need, I think, for a human interaction that is so important.
Yeah, and a human interaction that actually appears human, right? I mean, so often, it's very easy to get stuck in that the script, that script that was written by a committee of 50 lawyers, 40 years ago, right? Sure, that's a technically, I suppose, a human interaction, but doesn't actually have the hallmarks of a human interaction, right? And so it actually has to be a human interaction that feels human.
Right. And that could include technology such as chat, right? I mean, if
Yes.
chat is done poorly, then it's obvious that it's not a real human, or at least a human doing 50 chats and not really paying attention.
Right.
To
Stop
yours,
using macros and actually pay attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point. But so the thing that we've learned in our industry over the years is that you have to be able to provide, and I think we've said this over and over, but just to point out that you have to be able to provide the information to people in the method in which they like it, or the method in which they are comfortable receiving it. And sometimes that doesn't even involve the government. Sometimes that could involve their third-party provider, such as their software provider or their tax preparer. They would much rather have that buffer, and that's the way that they eliminate their fear. And that's one thing that the IRS has done very well with our industry, is we partner together to kind of provide that to the taxpayer public. But we've also found, as we support those tax preparers and those taxpayers, that we can't get away with not answering their question.
I was going to ask
we,
you that question.
We can't get away with not answering our telephone. We can't get away with not answering our chat. We have to provide those types of things, or they just go somewhere else to do it. And that's one of the big benefits, I believe, of our unique partnership, is it does provide that competitive angle to at least some of the pre-filing issues. A lot of the issues that provide challenges are the post-filing issues, where then that can't be leveraged, that type of competitive advantage.
It seems to me that distinction between the tax professionals and the taxpayers and what information they need, going back to that complexity issue, I think that what both the IRS and the software companies need to really think about, since you're here, I'm going to say it, is, because this just popped into my head as we were talking about this distinction, as you see, for example, people showing up with the alternative minimum tax at the end of the day. You think you've done everything, and then suddenly there's this add-on. And they don't really even notice it until they're signing the return. And they look and wait, I thought I was getting this refund, and then here's this line where AMT is added back on. And I think we can do a better job of explaining just how that happened, and whether it's the IRS or it's the software, that some of these things that software actually enables complexity, and because you can crunch the numbers. But what it doesn't do is that complexity undermines trust in the system.
Right.
And if you don't explain that complexity, it feels arbitrary and capricious, and people don't understand what's happening, and it increases their distrust in the government, and that impacts compliance. We've done a number of studies that have shown that the corollaries between non-compliance are lack of trust in the government, lack of trust in the fairness of the tax system, and lack of trust in the IRS. And everything else is just not really a mover of that. And you really see that tie between emotions, complexity, arbitrariness, distrust, and then what people's actions are in response to that.
And there's one thing I always like to make sure to mention when we start talking about, we're talking about doing more and redesigning things or whatever, right? People start to think, oh, this is going to be really expensive, right? And of course, budget is a concern for IRS. But usually, in fact, virtually always, providing a good experience for customers is cheaper than providing a bad one. Because when you provide a bad one, you have to keep fixing it. Right? And so it might seem to you like it was cheap, but it turns out to be really expensive. Of course, the classic example here is call centers, the classic call center where, the average handling time metric, where they've got to get you off the phone within a certain amount of time, right? And so, it's 60 seconds. Hey, what's your question? No, I can't help you. Whoa, I got him off the phone in 10 seconds. Boy, that was fast. That was super efficient. Yeah, well, guess what? He's going to call back. Then he's going to call back again. Then he's going to show up in your brick and mortar location. Right? Then he's going to take to social media, right? It's really expensive to provide a bad customer experience, right? And to say nothing of the fact that a good IRS customer experience will increase compliance,
Right.
which means more money for the Treasury.
So you were talking about UK before, but when I was visiting with UK several years ago, they told me the story of Orange phones and their customer service because they had talk time limits. And so people would call up, this is in the beginning of the cell phone, right? And people would call up and say, my cell phone doesn't work. And they'd try to sort of walk them through what they needed to do to activate their cell phone, but then they came up on the talk time limit and they'd say, well, just ship it back. Because it was within warranty, so the phone, the taxpayer would go and ship it, and they'd have to pay the shipping, and then it would arrive in this thing, and you'd have the technicians go through it, and they test the phone, and they say, everything is fine, it works, and then they'd send it back. Well, of course, what they found was that the taxpayer just didn't know not the taxpayer, the user didn't know how to work the phone. And when they eliminated the talk time limit, and let people spend the time to walk them through how to work the phone, their costs on customer service reduced because they didn't keep getting all these perfectly good phones shipped to them, tested by the engineers, and then sent back. I mean, it was just like, okay, there you go.
Amazing, yep.
Yep. Any other comments? We'll throw this open to the floor if anybody has questions or comments or observations that they'd like to make. I found this panel to be fascinating and really helpful and interesting. Maybe I'll ask you all the last question, which is if there's one thing you'd want the IRS to know in designing its future state, what would it be? What would you want the IRS to really keep in mind as it's designing the future state?
I think for me, it's one word: simplify.
Okay. The interaction or what? Or
Everything. The tax code, the interaction, the steps needed to do anything need to be simplified. It's too complex. It's only getting more complex, and it's begetting all of these problems. So I think simplification would be a good first step.
okay.
Mine is also one word, but it's hyphenated. Outside in. Outside in. That's IRS should design all of its services from the outside in, from the customer's perspective inward. So often things are designed, even if people mention the word customer from time to time during the meeting, they're designing things from the inside out based on internal mandates and internal structures and internal metrics. No, work from the outside in.
Okay. John, you get the final word.
I'm glad, because it took me a minute to come up with just one word. I didn't know that was going to be one of the requirements. So my one word would be partnerships.
Yeah.
I believe that the IRS partnering with folks like the previous panel, tax preparers and the tax software industry and web development industries and research companies, right, to find out focus groups and those types of things. I think that is key, and Nina, I think your panels have shown that, right? You brought in folks that have been surprising in the insight that they've had, and I kind of scratch my head and think that's a universal truth you're talking about. I can't believe that. I thought it was all just my experience. So that's what I believe, and I believe they're doing that. I believe they are open to that type of input, and I believe that the future state is, I'm pretty excited about it now that I've educated myself on it over the last month or so. And I believe that the IRS is very open to seeing that variety of ways to implement that. So.
Okay. Well, if no one else, yes, sir. Get to the phone, the microphone. That'd be great.
Preparing tax returns for 48 years, but I don't have a license or anything like that. I did pass your RTRP tax program, but one of the things that people talk about, congressmen talk about, is simplifying the tax code. I remember back in 1997, they changed the tax law in related to capital gains. They reduced the rate from 28% to 20%, but they added a second level. They went to short-term, intermediate term, and long-term. And I looked at that, and I commented to Congressman Archer one time that I thought that was a proposal that was conceived in hell. And Congressman Archer didn't agree with that until he had to do his own tax return. But do any of you people at the IRS ever sit down with the Appropriations or the Ways and Means Committee or whoever draws these things up and says, this is unworkable? I have looked at candidate Clinton's proposal on capital gains, and I would say that that is an idea conceived in hell taken to the power of 6. Does anyone sit down with these people and say, this is unworkable?
So Congress in 1998, in the restructuring and, the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act, actually required they didn't require, they said in the act, and so this is in the law, that it was the intention, the belief of Congress that IRS should bring up frontline technical experts, that's the legal term in the statute, to provide Congress with information about the difficulty of legislative proposals from the administration side. And in our 2014 annual report to Congress, we covered that requirement and asked the IRS, when was the last time you brought up a frontline technical expert to Congress to talk about the difficulties or the benefits of or doing something, writing the law in one way or another, as Congress has asked you to do in the law, and they said they don't do that. So they couldn't give us an answer of when a frontline technical expert had actually come up. So I think the short answer is the IRS sends the senior leadership up, but the people who are actually making the system go, which is what Congress wanted to hear from, are not getting that access to Congress. That's the official response of the IRS. Anybody else? That might explain why we get some of the things that we do. Okay, well, I want to thank this fabulous panel for just sharing so much good information, lots to think about, and I want to thank you all out there for staying and listening to these 3 panels. And I think our next one, I'm not sure when our next one is, but there's one coming up. We'll be somewhere in the United States in a week near you. And keep checking our website, because we'll be posting the transcripts slowly but sure-like. And they really are fascinating as you read what's being raised all around the country. So thank you very much.
Thank you.